Our next speaker is Alex Gosman. He's the CEO of AIGN, the Australian Industry Greenhouse Network, a network of industry associations and businesses. So Alex has worked previously for the Department of Industry, and over the last 25 years has had both association and company experience in manifold areas, including climate policy, industry development, telecom, and pharmaceuticals. Alex, I think you've also you were at the Lima Climate Summit, and so perhaps that's also some of the experience to bring into the discussion.
Got that. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Frank. And I have some bad news for you all. My parents-in-law are arriving from interstate about now, so I'm in no real hurry to go home. So, having said that, I'd just like to congratulate all of you who have stayed on. I'm also, like our first two speakers, a graduate of the ANU. I think I probably graduated before many of you were even thought of, and that was in the days when you could still get a car park here. So thank you. I'm going to be pretty blunt in terms of who we represent. So within the Australian Industry Greenhouse Network, we've been around for 20 years. And we've had very much a focus on climate change policy. That's all we do. So for much of the time of the network, it's actually been very much policy focused. The last couple of years, we did have a degree of implementation around Clean Energy Future, and of course, that's sort of now, that's all changed. But at the end of the day, we have a general proposition, and I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk about how that then relates back to our domestic and international policy views. Now, being the last speaker, a lot of the earlier speakers have probably covered to a degree what I want to say, and particularly with Peter and David Gruen, there are some similar sentiments. But just to sort of reflect what AIGN says at the end of the day, put simply, if Australia, with a large share of emissions-intensive production, resource and extractive sectors, and also a rapidly growing population, raises the cost of production in the Australian economy at a higher rate than our economy, other economies, it will put itself at a relative disadvantage. Now, I won't go on with the rest of it. So then I think that all then comes back to some of the discussion, and most of the speakers have talked about it, and Anthea and Irwin talked about it in their session in answering a question. What supports the target is the domestic policies that support the target are vitally important, and that's where AIGN is very interested in contributing towards. And I know what I've said there I don't think is too dissimilar to what Peter talked about in terms of the approach that the Australian government will be adopting in thinking around what its target will be. So probably at the end of the day, there's been a lot of talk here about where Australia's position should be. We would say being in the pack is appropriate for Australia, and that ties in with what I've said there. Others have talked about a leadership position. Now, I did go to the Lima Accord. I've only been with AIGN for 3 years, so I've been to the Doha, Warsaw and Lima meeting, and there's some of the outcomes, and Peter talked about that. One is the information around how do you develop an INDC, the draft decision text, which has actually doubled in size since the Lima meeting. And also, Cristiano Figueres, the General Secretary of the UNFCCC, talked about this year being the year the numbers were brought forward, the INDCs. What we're already beginning to see, what we hope to see by mid-year. I think the other point, if I could just talk about the 3 COPs that I've been to, I find the people who go there are very professional, very committed, but they always run over time, and at best I think they conclude Saturday afternoon, and the Lima meeting concluded Sunday 3 o'clock in the morning when it was due to finish around 5 o'clock Friday afternoon. And I think that just feeds back to some of what Peter was saying. There's a lot of difficult issues that still need to be resolved. We do have this 86-page decision text. When is the time that some of these decisions will be made? And I suppose some of the risk is that the decisions won't be made before Paris starts. Now, I wasn't around when Copenhagen occurred, so I can't speak on any expert nature, but I think one of the issues I do hear is that the expectations were that an agreement would be signed there. And I think there's a lot of work being taken to make sure that there isn't that similar level of expectations in terms of the nature of what will come out of Paris. And I think something will come out of Paris because I don't think we can afford to fail. But I think what I'd like to sort of highlight in this slide is Paris is a step on the way. It won't contain everything. It won't be a self-enclosed document. There'll be a lot more work that will be done. And also think, I'll just reflect on some of the comments, Frank, to your point about Lima and what happened. Probably the best speaker I've heard, the 3 COPs I've gone to, at the end of the day in Lima was the New Zealand Trade Minister, who, it's interesting, he's been to all the conferences since Copenhagen, so that means he's had 6 years of continuity, which is probably something interesting to compare to in Australia. But he was very much the one who brought forward this idea around bounded flexibility, but he made the comment in Copenhagen, he went into a meeting room at 3 o'clock in the morning and there was 3,000 delegates from 190 countries. What chance have you got of any agreement? So I think that just reflects the nature of what the process will be going forward. Now, AIGN has these principles, so we do support international action being taken, and within the domestic environment, we do, within our principles, we support the application of market forces. But I thought it might be just worthwhile, very briefly, to highlight some assessment of the INDC nature and also of the nature agreement against the principles that we outline. So I think it's quite clear, and that's the key point of the INDCs, is that they are going to allow differentiated national approaches. That's the means by which they'll drive a bottoms-up agreement. It will promote, hopefully, international competition because it allows that flexibility that didn't exist under the Kyoto Protocol. But will it resolve the divide between the developed and the developing economies? And I don't think so. And so I think these issues of adaptation, finance, loss and damage will probably continue to bedevil a lot of the discussions going forward. But it'd be great if they can be resolved. I then think we do just get into a number of areas which relates both to the agreements and both to the nature of the individual INDCs that countries will be bringing forward. And because we haven't seen them all, we don't know what they will contain. But we will have questions around, do they minimise the cost? Does it distribute the burden equitably across the international community? And there's obviously a huge debate around what equitably means. Is it comprehensive in its coverage of countries, greenhouse gases, sources of sinks? I think we're going to have to wait for that. And I suppose an important point that I think Peter or David also talked about is it underpinned by streamlined, efficient and effective administrative reporting and compliance arrangements, because I think that's always been one of the key aspects that's supplied any scheme that Australia's had in place, and it's probably not it's not a difficult ask to request a minimal level of reporting from other countries. And then look, our final points in terms of the expectations within AIGN of an Australian approach to a new international agreement. And I'd just highlight the word there that we expect our domestic policies and commitments to be in line with our trade competitors. Now, a lot of the people here today have talked about trade partners. Trading partners, people then often say, well, that's the EU, that's China, that's the US. Well, within AIGN, we've done some analysis of our members, and our major trading partners are 39 countries. And they cover some of the countries you'd expect, but they also cover countries like the Middle East and so on. So I think it's important that in terms of the work that's undertaken within the PM's task force, there's a breadth of looking at what other countries are covered. We're going to do some work within AIGN around the comparability of effort, and we'll make that available on our website when that's concluded. We need policies that reflect the nature of the Australian economic characteristics, and a number of speakers have already talked about population growth, emissions intensive. It maintains the competitiveness of Australian export and import competing industries, and that's a very important point. It adopts a consultative approach to the development of new policies and provides access to international units. And I'll just finish on one point, because there has been a bit of a discussion around state government policies. And again, within the AIGN principles, we're a very strong supporter of a national focus on climate change policy, because the last thing anyone in industry wants is having to meet 6 or 7 different requirements across the one nation. We've done a lot of work over many years in coming towards a common approach. Within the climate change area, within COAG, I think we've moved down from about 297 different state-based policies applying to less than a handful. That will be something David Gruen from Treasury said that they'll be writing to the states around their climate change policies. We will also be writing to the states. We might have a slightly different element in what our letter might be, but I think that's also an important area where we look at a national approach. So Frank, thank you very much for your time.